Hello, good day. Welcome to the Toon Under podcast. I'm Jack in Brisbane, and Craig is with me in Mackay. How are you, Craig?
I'm canny, mate. Yourself, eh?
Yeah, not bad. Not bad for Wednesday. I'm still basking in the Brisbane Lions AFL victory, which you don't care about. But
No.
it's not every day one of the teams you follow actually wins something. So it was a very strange experience for me on Saturday. I was at a wedding as well, so I was kind of watching it while I was watching the speeches, and then the Newcastle match was on, so I had that on my phone as well later on. So I wasn't the most present wedding guest, but I was in a good mood because of the results. So I was enjoying myself. So today
Happy
we're going to
days.
do three things. We're going to try and find something to talk about from the Wimbledon game this morning, which was probably the most boring game of football that I've ever witnessed. It was extremely dull, but we'll touch on that. We'll have a little look ahead to Everton at the weekend, and then we're also going to talk about the stadium feasibility study, the potential plans for the new stadium or for the revamped St James's Park. And this is in light of the Luke Edwards article in the Telegraph, which came out yesterday as well. So there's a little bit of new information in there, so we can look at that. The stadium chats always get a lot of interest, and they bring emotions up for everybody. So they're always a good thing to talk about. So we'll touch on that in the kind of the main part of the podcast. But first of all, let's have a look back to 4:45 a.m. this morning, which is what time it was when our Carabao Cup third round game kicked off against Wimbledon. Obviously, it was scheduled for last week, but then their pitch turned into a golf pitch, so they had to play the game up at St James's Park. It was a sellout. The Wimbledon fans had sold out, and I think Newcastle had sold out as well, and it was good to help Wimbledon get some money towards the renovations, which they're going to need because they've got a lot of games in that League Two that they're in. But is there anything of interest to discuss regarding this game? It was boring, 1-0, Kevin Sharp penalty just before half time. That was really it, wasn't it, Craig?
Yeah, it was like a training exercise. It was almost exhibition friendly type football. And no disrespect to Wimbledon, but it was pretty much men against boys as well. But yeah, it was dull. It was something, easily forgettable. You're not going to look back on this game in a few years' time and go, God, I'm glad I watched that. It's going to be put back in one of the distant file memories and forgotten about for long periods of time.
I remember a game against Fulham, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but Joey Barton scored a penalty for us. So I don't know if it was, I think it was before we got relegated. So it must have been around 2008 maybe or something, before we got relegated the first time. Joey Barton scored a penalty at the end, but that was the most boring game of football I've ever watched until this one involving Newcastle, because I can't really concentrate on other teams' games anyway, but this was particularly dull. I think for us, a couple of the positives, we had 90 minutes for some players, so minutes in the legs for people like Tino. Kelly got 90 as well. Longstaff, Willock, Miggy, and William Asula also got a start. We had full or part rest for the likes of Pope and Tonali. Bruno got a half. Gordon came on. Joe Linton came off. Barnes came off, and Lewis Hall came on. So all of those players either played a little bit or didn't play any. So that's good as well. So they've got a break ahead of Everton. I guess there was a bit of interest with William Asula starting the game for the first time.
Yeah.
We haven't seen much of him at all. He came on in the friendly, scored an offside goal at St James's Park just before the season started, and then he came on against Fulham as well. But there's been times when he hasn't really been trusted to come on, even when we haven't had Alex Isak playing. What did you make of William Asula's first start for Newcastle?
He got himself about a bit, didn't he? He's rapid for a big fella as well. He reminds me a lot of like an early Joe Linton when he came to the club. Bit raw, lots of strength, lots of power, lots of pace. But he's far from the finished article, which is good to know. And obviously, under Eddie, he'd only flourish. Exciting prospect, that's for sure.
Yeah, it's interesting to see him sort of. He's 21, so he's not like an
Yeah.
absolute youngster. He turned 21 in the summer. He hasn't got a great amount of senior football behind him. He came on off the bench quite a lot for Sheffield United last season in the Premier League. He had a loan spell at Derby, which he did all right. He looks physically really good, doesn't he? He's big. He's 6'4". He's really quick. He can get shots off both feet as well. So he looks like he's got the attributes to, be a good prospect. But I don't know if he can actually play football. Like I'm just wondering why he hasn't had more senior football up to now. Maybe it was just the clubs he was at and the situations they were in. But we've obviously seen enough in him, and he does press and he does put himself about a bit. And it's hard for players when they come into games like this when they're playing with players they haven't played with before as well. So like the combinations are not there, and that they don't know what runs they're going to be making and things like that. So he was up against a low block defense as well, which they defended quite well, to be fair to them. So he didn't have that much opportunity to do much, but he definitely looks the part, like in terms of the way he moves and his height. So it's definitely exciting to see what is going to happen to him after a year of Eddie Howe coaching and playing with Alex Isak and learn from Callum Wilson whenever he gets himself fit as well. So it was good to see him get a start, and hopefully we'll see him a little bit off the bench as well in Premier League games in the future. So we progressed to play Chelsea in the next round at St James's Park. Chelsea not great, home tie good. It's good that game's at home. It's sandwiched in between an away game at Stamford Bridge in the league and a home game against Arsenal. So that's going to be quite a tough week. What's your sort of thoughts ahead of that? That week coming up in next month, or later this month, but that tie as well in the fourth round. It's not the easiest, but not the hardest we could have got.
Well, Chelsea's record at St James's of late isn't that great either. They got absolutely destroyed 4-1 last season. And I think the season before that, it was 1-0. Willock got the winner just before the World Cup break. And then I think even before then, was it Isaac Hayden who got the winner right at the death? Back when Brucey was the manager. So their record at St James's isn't great. And I think from that, they've only scored 1 goal in 3 attempts. And that was a top quality free kick from Raheem Sterling last season. Their record coming up here isn't fantastic. That's good to know. Defensively, they're quite frail, but they are a free scoring team as of late. I think they're the highest goal scoring team in the league. They put 6 past Wolves, which is no easy feat. They put 4 past, I think it was a Bournemouth at the weekend.
Might be wrong on
that one,
Brighton,
was.
Yeah.
Brighton. And Brighton, they're not exactly a bunch of slackers or anything, I guess. So Cole Palmer, I think he got 4 of those goals as well.
He did.
Or something like that. But take him out of the team, it could be a different matter. They may want to rest people because I don't know what their fixtures stack up's going to be like. They are playing in Europe as well, so they may have other priorities. So we'll see. Confident we can get the job done though.
Yeah, I think any home tie is good. I'm surprised that they didn't do some kind of system where the European teams got to avoid other European teams, although I think they might have done anyway. Although I think maybe Spurs are playing Man City or something like that. But the way the draw went last time for the third round, it was fucking ridiculous. Nobody even knew that was going to happen, where the European teams were seeded until the draw happened. And then it was like, well, hang on, what's going on here? It's just completely weighted in favor of, the bigger clubs. And I know it's because there was a European week at the same time as the round last week, but there's so much football going on now that these clashes are going to happen, and it just feels a bit wrong that they're sort of devaluing domestic cup competitions like that. But anyway, never mind. We're through in the next round, and we'll see what happens. Is there anything else you wanted to say about this game, or anything else to say? It really was training session boring game, wasn't it? Got a little bit nervy towards the end when they had a few balls into the box, but we managed to defend well enough, I think, didn't we?
It would have just been our luck if we would have conceded it goes to penalties, because then it's just a lottery who wins that shootout, to be honest. But now it was a well-controlled game, men against boys, and hopefully we can get a decent result against Chelsea and progress in the cup. We're all than one actually after the reverse fixture in the cup last season when Trips handed, was it Mudryk that sitter right at the death, and then we went out on a pen. So yes, we definitely owe Chelsea one moving forward.
And probably the last thing about this game, I've seen a couple of quotes from Eddie who said he wasn't happy with the attacking play. And it's quite difficult, like I said, when you've got these players coming in who don't know each other or they haven't played with each other before in a competitive game. So they don't know each other's movements or passes and all that sort of stuff. So It was a bit disjointed, I think, going forward, but it was against a low block, and we did defend well what we had to. So it is what it is, and no one's ever going to think about that game anymore after this. So let's move on. Let's talk about the Everton game. So we've got Everton coming up. I think it's the Saturday tea time game in the UK. So it's like 3:30 in the morning, 2:30 in the morning for us, just before the clocks change. But at least it's a weekend, this one. So last season against Everton was really miserable 3-0 reverse in December. And that kicked off that really terrible run of form for 2 months. It was a really bad night for Kieran Trippier that night. It was 1-0 to them getting close to the end, and Gordon had a couple of chances he missed in the second half, and then we just kind of collapsed towards the end. But that was the very beginning of that sort of period of just really bad defeats, injuries all over the place. It was a really tough night, that one. And then the game at St James's was the 1-1 put in around April when Paul Dimmitt decided to do a little bit of WWE wrestling towards the end and give away that penalty. And that was a fine margins game because we scored the second goal, but Dan Burn was judged to have been offside for that one. So, and that was when we needed the points for Europe. So the games last season against Everton were a little bit frustrating. We've had some good memories against them lately. They've not exactly been a good team, but Goodison always seems to be a midweek game, so it's nice that this one's on a weekend instead of midweek for the last time we go there, and we can sell out and the fans can have a good day, hopefully, and maybe take some seats home as souvenirs. Everton this season, they've won 1, drawn 1, and lost 4, and that includes absolute hammerings off Brighton and Spurs in the first 2 games. And then they've had 2 really spectacular throwaways of 2-goal leads against Bournemouth, where they were 2-0 in the 87th minute and managed to lose 3-2. And then Villa, which is a little bit different. They were 2-0 up in that as well, and they lost again. And they could have scored more goals in that game. So there, the form's not been great. They beat Crystal Palace in the last game, and they've had a draw with Leicester as well. But there's all sorts of stuff going on at that club with the takeover. It looks like they're about to be taken over by the Friedkin Group, who own Roma at the moment, an American family. How important do you think it is, Craig, that we back up that performance and the point against Man City with a good performance and 3 points against Everton?
Absolutely, it's paramount, isn't it? It'll basically mean if we don't get a result in this game, the result against City is almost irrelevant, purely on the basis that we have to build. The top of the table, or even the top half of the table, is already starting to get very compact, and we're only a short amount of games in. So if we can pull out a little stretch on those below us and create a little mini table of our own, effectively, with those in and around us, then all the better for it. And we do have a tough run of games coming up, as you mentioned. So we've got the likes of there's Brighton, there's Arsenal and Chelsea all in the mix shortly after. And they're teams that will be in and around us, if not above us, come the end of the season. So we need to put down a good marker for those results when things might not go our way, maybe against Arsenal. I'm not sure if I think it's at St James's, that one. So, if we can pick up those 3 points against Everton, maybe drop 1 or 2 points against Chelsea or Arsenal, which you wouldn't really be overly disappointed with, especially against Arsenal. They're playing some cracking football. But definitely picking up points, those that propping up the foot of the table, and Everton are definitely doing that. Defensively, they're ridiculously fragile. Attack, Calvert-Lewin, he's always got a good record against us, unfortunately. But yeah, it is absolutely paramount we get 3 points in this game.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. You know, the City performance was really good, and the result was good. But that performance, it's fine to raise yourself for the games against Man City, and we often do that at St James's Park. And when you've got the crowd feeding off you, and it was a really Anthony Gordon's day against Man City with the display for him before the game, and then he really took that energy and he gave his best performance of this season by a mile. And I think we were really good value for that point, and maybe even for 3 points. But it does it won't feel, because 1 point's not that good, in any game. So it won't feel like that was worth it unless we can go to Everton and get that 3 points. We really need to see a good performance from the beginning. We need to start seeing what we hope is going to be our settled team. or what's the strongest team we can put out. So we've got a feeling after 8 games that Eddie is starting to know what his best team is, and we want to see that midfield start to work together as well. So I agree with you. I really think we need to be winning this game. These are the games that we need to target, and we need to get 3 points if we want to have any hope of getting into the top 4 or 5, and even top 6. We're going to have to be putting teams like Everton away. I think they are quite dangerous. They've scored, I think, 7 goals, but they've conceded 15 goals. So, and it's time for us. We scored 5 there a few seasons ago, so I think it's time for it. Or it was 4. I think Shah had a disallowed goal. So in that game where Isak did that assist, that wasn't an assist because it touched someone on the way to Murphy. But yeah, we need to see if we can put in a really strong performance for more than half an hour, more than a half. A good away performance for the full game, and I think we should have confidence from the Man City game that we can take into it. Our away league form since January. So there's a bit of a narrative that our away form has been terrible for a long time. But if you actually look at the numbers, so since the 1st of January this year, we've actually won 6, drawn 1, and lost 6 of the 13 away league games we've had. So that's 1.46 points per game. It's a possible 19 out of 39 points available over that time. So if you did that over the course of the season, you'd have around 28 points away from home, which isn't actually too bad, if you manage to do that over the course of a season. But I think the issue is, and why that narrative has developed, is that the performances generally have just not been convincing, have they? I think apart from Burnley, which was a bit of a walkover, and we had a good win against Villa. Villa was a good one. But even against Brentford on the last game, we took a strong lead and then let them get back into it in that game before we went on to win. But performances have not really, on the whole, been convincing, have their way from home for quite a while. How do you think we can go about this game to get those 3 points that we really need and, put a really strong away performance in?
The biggest thing going to do is control the aggression. I think all 3 of the midfield players got booked against City. And I think Joe Linton, he picks up a yellow card pretty much every other game or so. Bruno, he treads that fine line, doesn't he, of going that little bit rage with a ref, and then he realizes he's got to calm down. And Tonali had his little spat with Grealish in the corner flag, I think it was. So if we can control the aggression, because typical dice ball, they will come out and try and kick 7 shades of shit out of us to try and disrupt us and put we're off a rhythm, that sort of thing. If we can control that side of our game and we can get our passing game on the go, and we don't even necessarily even get them on the counter, because again, defensively they're quite weak. We've got players who can shoot from distance. Harvey Barnes, Jacob Murphy, they can both crack one from outside of the box, as we know. And Gordon, if he is up top or out wide, depending on the formation or lineup that he goes with, we've got players who can absolutely destroy them on their day. In City, they couldn't really cope with some of the attacks that we've done. And if City can't cope, and they've got one of the best defences in the world, then surely Everton can't. But again, another good thing would be to keep that Goodison Park crowd quiet. Because when they're on song, it is one of the better atmospheres in the league. It's quite an intimidating ground because you're very close to the pitch for the fans. If we can keep them quiet, then again, we've got a really, really good chance.
So I asked you to give me a lineup before. So you've pretty much gone with the same team that started against Man City. So do you think that's the way that we'll go for this one? And if so, is that a positive sign for you that we're starting to show signs of that we actually know what our current best team is?
Absolutely, yeah. I think the midfield 3 pick themselves. That's not a problem at all. The only potential argument or headache, is a good headache, is when Isak or Wilson is back, who starts up top, and then where do you put Gordon and or Barnes, or do you play them both? But again, that's a good headache to have. The only potential thing with this lineup is not sure on Trips' fitness, because obviously went off with cramp against City, and he wasn't even featured on the bench this morning, I don't think. So that could be touch and go. But if he's not, then Tino is a very capable replacement, as we know. And Shaw, did he get subbed off with an injury? He rolled his ankle, didn't he? In
Yeah, but
the game.
He always gets some kind of injury, doesn't he? And he's always fine, so I'm sure he's all right.
Fair enough. But yeah, if Shaw's not there, then maybe would you move Byrne to the right and put Kelly to the left if Shaw is unavailable?
I think he'd probably put Kraft in there, wouldn't he? Because that's what he's been doing. That's what he was doing early in the season, and those two, Byrne and Kraft, are good at like traditional backs to the wall defending, and there might be a little bit of that with direct balls up to Dominic Calvert-Lewin. So
I'll
have to see what happens, but I don't think there's any indication that Shaw's not going to be fit. So, and it really changes the way the team plays, doesn't it? When Fabian Shaw is there and when he isn't, because when he's there, the way we attack changes, because he was spraying some beautiful passes around today as well, because there was no pressure on him, so he had time and space to do it. But that's what he brings that we don't get that when the other defenders are there. I think Kelly can pick a pass as well, but Eddie does seem to prefer Kraft in there as well. So I think that midfield three, and we're almost 18 months after Tonali signed, or at least 14 months after he signed, and we haven't seen it. We've seen it a couple of times last season, but even then he was in and out of the team before he got banned. And then this season, there's been the one game they've started together. So, but I think that is probably the best midfield three we've got in terms of the balance as well. Sometimes you might want Willock in there for his ball carrying, but I think Willock's a useful option to have off the bench, isn't he? So, yeah, I'm really hopeful that we start to see a settled team, because I think that's when we've always played our best football, and a bit of rotation's fine. We need to be able to do that. We've got a big enough squad to do it, but I think Eddie needs to know when you can rotate. And I mean, people like Tonali got to be first name on the team sheet now. He's fit, and even if he goes off with cramp again, that's okay. But we need to try and get him up to speed. He had those 2 games for Italy, and I was saying on the last pod, I was on after the Fulham game, I just couldn't understand why he wasn't starting games. So I was very pleased to see that remedied last week. It's a big game for Gordon, this as well, isn't it? He didn't have the best time back at Goodison last season.
Yeah, well, it's the last team you'll get to play at Goodison as well, unless we get them maybe in the FA Cup. I think they're out of the League Cup. I think they got knocked out in first opportunity. Yeah. So unless we get them in the FA Cup later on this year, Gordon's not going to get a chance at shushing that Gladys Street end. I said this when Gordon played his first game back at Goodison since he signed in that January. I think that's when we won 4-1. I really wanted him to score and do a full-on Adebayor, just run the length of the pitch and just slide on his knees, Gordon the Everton fans, because to me, that would just be poetic justice for the way he was hounded out of that club by the fans. And the way the club actually treated his exit as well. I think it was just a shit mentality from a small-minded club. The way they just said, we've agreed a fee, tough, piss off, we're pretty much going to wipe you from the existence of history of the club. It was just a very bad way of doing things. And I think he feels a little bit bitter and a little bit sad about how his time at Everton ended. I think you mentioned that on the overlap interview he did with Gary Neville. And I want him to score, and I want him to celebrate as well. I hate it when former players don't celebrate against their old clubs. I think they really should go batshit. You scored a goal. It's what you pay to do. Score goals. You put them in the back of the net. Go Raj. Do what you want to do. None of this just calm down type thing. And yeah, I really hope he does put in a quality performance. And after the City game, he should be on cloud 9.
Yeah, plus hopefully he's got his new contract sorted as well, signed and sealed in the next few days. So that would be a bonus for him. He only came on that first time we played them there. He came on towards the end, and then last season, obviously, he missed a few chances and he didn't have his best game. So let's hope he's got his shooting boots on and he's feeling good, because when he's on form, he's unstoppable. And I think hopefully there was signs in City that he's getting back to that. So let's hope we see that from him. Let's do a quick prediction for this one then before we start talking about the stadium. What do you think the score will be for this one?
I'm going to say 3-1 us.
All right. I'm going to say, I think it'll be 2-1. But I think I'm hoping it's going to be more comfortable than the Wolves one. I think maybe a couple of goals for us early and then they pull one back, but we see it out, and that would do me. Right, let's have a chat about the stadium now. This is what we kind of the big thing we want to talk about today. Like I said before, every time we talk about this, it gets a big reaction. There's been news coming out recently that there's, the feasibility study has been apparently imminent for for about 3 months. We know that the club have been conducting this stadium feasibility study for quite a while. And like I said, they said it's been imminent for a while. We know that expanding St James's Park is one of the options on the table. And Mehrdad Qadusi, who's obviously not there anymore, was very strong about saying that we don't want to leave St James's Park. It's our home. It's the cathedral on the hill. All of those cliches. So we know that's one option, to renovate and expand St James's. We presume that another option they're looking at is to build a new stadium completely, whether that's somewhere in the vicinity of Newcastle city centre, whether it's somewhere else. I think this feasibility study is probably looking at all options, and I think that's why it's taking so long, because they've got to do the due diligence and see if they can work out what they can do. Emotions run very high on the subject, because obviously everyone loves St James's Park. Nobody wants to see the traditions of the club trashed in any way or denigrated, and Newcastle have played at that site since they merged in 1892. So the site itself is very significant for a lot of people. But we know that St James's Park is not big enough or modern enough to fulfill the club's ambitions. Everyone's agreed on that as well. We need more seats. They need more corporate areas. Sadly, that's the way football is. They need more money coming in from the people who've got the money. And also the stadium's getting old. It hasn't been renovated since 2000. And it's also gone from the second biggest Premier League ground in the early 2000s. And it's around the seventh or the eighth now. And you've got even clubs like Leeds saying that they're going to do an expansion, which is bigger. So the stadium, even if we hadn't had the takeover, probably it needed some love and it needed some attention, I think, because of the way that it's kind of, well, it had been left to go into disrepair anyway. But the takeovers just focused everyone that, there's no tickets available anymore. Like, it's really hard to get tickets. We need a bigger stadium and we need a better stadium. So Luke Edwards reported yesterday that it's going to cost between around 800 million to 1 billion. And he said that this is to expand and rebuild St James's Park. So he's talking about an expansion of the Gallagher in the East stands and modernisation of the Leazes and the Milburn stands, whatever that looks like, if that's some kind of renovation. He said in his article that an alternative would be to build a new stadium, and that Leazes Park has been earmarked for that. But that would cost 2 to 3 billion potentially. These are just figures being thrown out in the air, But he also mentioned there'd be legal challenges around planning and the green space of building on Leazes Park. And he said that the delay is because they want to get it right. So as well as this feasibility study, everyone they've have to talk to and everything they have to take into account, that he's been briefed by somebody in the club, or somebody's told him that the club want to get it right. So the first thing I want to ask you about this, Craig, is, do you think that this story is being leaked so that the club can kind of gauge fan reaction a bit and get a feel for what the fan base is thinking about the stadium? Because everyone's got an opinion about this and everyone will have something to say about it. So before we talk about what you want to happen, do you think that there's a strategy in releasing this information to journalists who's then going to go and release it, and then there's going to be a reaction? The club can read that and see what people are saying and thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good way to test the water, I suppose, isn't it? And I do think that the club have got the feelers out. Nobody wants to leave St James's Park. I think that's a given. Nobody wants to, but there could be a case of we have to. And I think that's where the big argument's going to be coming into it. In terms of the media getting hold of any monetary values or anything like that, I think they've just literally got some figures of maybe previous stadium builds and stuff. For example, Spurs, their stadium cost £1 billion, I think it was. And there's a few over in the States. I think we played there in the summer series, the year gone. The one that Darren Eales helped put together or something, I think it was. That was cracking stadium as well, by the way. Yeah. So they're all figures just banded around off recent builds, I think. How much it will cost is anyone's guess, and it all depends if we do want to build that skyscraper that Mehrdad Qadusi talked about at the very beginning of the takeover. We all know the funds what PIF have got, whether they see it as a long-term investment or whether they're going to dig deep into their pockets. And obviously, the Rubens will have to front some of the cash as well. So, yeah, it's wait and see on that one. It definitely has been leaked in advance. And I think you're right. They are just testing the water to see what the public reaction would be.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of a change as well. I think initially when this was brought out into the public, there was very strong opinion that we need to stay at St James's Park and that we should be renovating St James's Park first and foremost, and that we absolutely can't leave under any circumstances. But I think since then we've seen what's happened with PSR. We've seen that we haven't been able to spend money on players lately. I wonder if it's all part of the club's not the club's plan to obviously get into that mess we got into, but there's a lot more information to hand now about the impact of what revenues can bring to your club in terms of your ambition and how big you can grow and how quick it might take for us to get where we want to get to. So I think now, even 6 months ago, I think it was a different situation because we hadn't been through that PSR catastrophe. And I think now there's probably a softening of fan opinion generally about moving away from St James's Park or having a new stadium. So I think the conversation is different now to what it was and what it would have been previously. We've spoken about this on previous pods, but just again for people who maybe haven't seen the last ones or people who don't talk to you most days, what would your ideal scenario be for this stadium plan? Obviously, factoring in that none of us are architects, none of us know how much this is going to cost or how feasible or realistic these things actually are. But what do you hope to see? What's your ideal scenario, and what do you hope to see from the feasibility study when it is released?
Well, my first initial reaction was we have to stay at St James's Park. My second reaction when it got leaked, I think maybe another 6 months ago, whenever it was, we still have to stay at St James's Park. And that's still my reaction now. I'm a little bit old school in terms of that type of scenario. I totally understand if we have to leave for the whole PSR shenanigans, as you mentioned. But if there is just a slight opportunity where we can expand St James's to 70 plus, or even 70,000. I think anything less than 70,000 isn't worth it. If we can't do that at St James's, then we move, we relocate to wherever that was going to be. And hopefully it's still within the city centre remit. But if it's 70 plus or above and we can do that, absolutely. I can't see us needing anything more than that for the foreseeable future, for at least another 10, 15, possibly 20 years or so. How it will be done is anyone's guess. Biggest thing would be to expand the Gallagher and try and fill in the corners between that and the Melbourne stand, so it looks like the Sir John Hall, and totally redevelop the East Stand. That East Stand is the oldest part of the stadium, I believe, which barely even got touched when it got redone last time back in towards the end of the 99-2000 season. I think it was when went up to 52. So that part of the stadium is probably well over 30, 40 years old. That's the bit that needs remodernising. There's been talk of how they could rebuild it with glasswork for the natural light so the houses behind it can still get what they want. If they can do it, absolutely possible. I have no idea what the capacity of the Sir John Hall stand is itself in comparison to the Gallagher and what difference that would make to an overall capacity if you could bring it around. And then if you could do that with the East Stand, would that add an extra 18,000 seats? Who knows? It could very well do. It could fall very well short. But my overall opinion is if we can get it to 70,000 or above, stay. If not, then we move with a heavy heart, a big heavy heart.
The talk seems to be that they can't extend past around 60,000, so that would be 8,000 extra seats on probably the Gallagher and maybe a bit in the East Stand. So that seems to be what the general consensus is. I've got a bit of I've got a couple of non-negotiables as well though. So I think that the stadium, the unique selling point of Newcastle United is that it's in the city centre. And that's not just for ease of fans to get there; it's for all of the business that's around there. And I know people who run pubs around there and stuff. So, it would be devastating for not just for the hospitality places, but the shops. The city's completely bouncing on a match day, and I think that's because the match is on. And it's the absolute heartbeat of the city, and that's a real cliche, but it's true. I think that you'd be really ripping something out of you'd be taking something very special from what makes Newcastle United what it is away if the stadium wasn't still in the city centre. So I think that's my big non-negotiable. In terms of the capacity, if you look at the Arsenal Stadium, 60,000, Spurs 62,000, Anfield's around 62,000 as well now. Man United have obviously got 74,000 and they need to rebuild they're going to completely rebuild Old Trafford as well. But people got excited about when the takeover happened, saying we need this capacity. I honestly think in the long term, I think 62, 65,000 max is enough for Newcastle. And I think that will be the case in the long term as well. I think as long as it doesn't all go to corporate, which it probably will, the extra seats, and as long as there's a way of people getting tickets, kids getting tickets, and for fans who not just tourist fans or people who come from overseas who pay all the money, but local fans to get in. Maybe that's just a complete pipe dream with the way things are now with the world and football. But I think that 65 maximum is enough for a club of the size of Newcastle, and I think that would give us all of everything we need. Whether St James's can get to that, who knows? Because it probably can't, just by extending the Gallagher in the East Stand. But yeah, I think the stadium, if it is to stay at St James Park, it needs a refit anyway. And I think that's what the gist of Luke Edwards' article saying, it'll be a complete refit. So you'd have new corporate areas. They'd have to do something probably about the access at around the East Stand, because it's quite tight to get in there, and that's restricted obviously by Lees' terrace. So there's all sorts of things to take into consideration, and I'm interested in how much of this comes out in the feasibility study, and if apparently they're going to liaise with the fan advisory board before they release it as well, so they'll get some fan opinion in there. But I don't know, it's hard to, the way that people were just sort of parachuted into that board, it's hard to know how independent their thoughts are going to be about it. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens. I'm just going to pull up a little map here for people watching on YouTube of Lees' Park and St James's Park. So what made me think about this was in the article today, but we've been having some discussions here in Brisbane about the Olympic Stadium, and they've been talking about building the Olympic Stadium in Victoria Park. And they said that the footprint of a new stadium would take up around 12% of the park. And then that, they would be able to build green space around it. So if you look at St James's Park here next to Lees' Park, you could probably fit around, I'd say, 7 St James's Parks into Lees' Park. That's not actually that much of the space of Lees' Park, if it was done if it was done properly, and then you could potentially repurpose the current site of St James's Park, even though it's not part of Lees' Park, but you could maybe just make that into green public space, because there's going to be so many legal problems and red tape if they want to try and build in Lees' Park. But it seems to be, that's probably the best way of actually getting this kind of stadium we want still in the city centre, even if it's moving St James's Park a little bit. But then you've got all sorts of questions about where they're going to play in the meantime and how's it all going to work, and we've got the Euro 2028 as well coming up to think about. So for me, I think if it was possible, sticking it in Lees' Park somewhere would be good, because you're still in the city centre. You can change where St James's Park is now into green space and hopefully keep everybody happy. But I don't know. It still seems a bit far-fetched, doesn't it, at this point, Craig?
It does. And I totally get the idea of moving into Lees' Park. And someone done those concept builds on YouTube a while ago. I don't know if you remember seeing those.
Good one.
And some of those concept builds were fantastic. Yeah, they look absolutely amazing. But you're right about the space involved there. Obviously, St James's, as it currently stands right now, holds 52,000 and a bit. The new one, how big they want to build it, is entirely up to them, and how much extra space that would take up. Maybe they could get the same type of capacity as Spurs for the same footprint as we've got now, just totally redesigned structure, that sort of thing. But one thing that in our Telegram chat that we've now got, speaking of one of the lads that's in the group, Mark Routledge, he's actually said that it's costing Newcastle City Council £250,000 a year to maintain Lees' Park. If PIF were to turn around and say, we'll buy Lees' Park off your hands we'll maintain it for the foreseeable for you, and we will then give you back. Is it the leasehold on St James's? They've got to make a decision on that sometime soon. We'll give you that back, and you can do what you would see fit with St James's Park. The council then gets £250,000 back into its pot, which it can then spend on everything from fixing potholes to doing whatever it wants to do with it. That's potentially another thing there. If PIF start waving a blank checkbook at them, who knows what councils will do, because councils are going broke left, right, and centre. So maybe that's a way that it'll be done. PIF just throwing cash at them. It's definitely a possibility. Who knows? We will see. But I think that's a very interesting factor, how much the council pay just to maintain it. And it never really gets used anywhere near as much as it used to.
It's never that busy. There's never much going on in there, I don't think. And you've got other parks nearby as well. But I think we'll probably have to take a step back and just remember that, although this sounds unbelievable, not everybody in Newcastle is a massive Newcastle United fan, and most people are. But it's the institution, obviously, that has got so much love for it and gets so much of the attention and brings positivity to the city as well in terms of the image. But not everyone, and especially people on councils and people who live around there, are not going to want necessarily green space to be ripped up just for a football stadium that they don't care about. So you have to factor in that that's going to play a part in it, and there's going to be a lot of wrangling if that is the option they decide to try and go for. But something that also doesn't really get talked about a lot is, what do PIF actually want? They're going to be the ones who are going to be putting this money in here. So I know 3 billion or 1 billion is not a lot of money to them, but they're still going to want some sort of, like Lee was saying in our group chat, some kind of return on their investment, because they have bought Newcastle United as an investment. So whether it's for soft power in terms of, investing in sport and improving the image of their country, or whether they want to make money back from it, they're not going to necessarily make money back quickly by plowing 3 billion into a new stadium. But if you look at it from their perspective as well, they don't care about the city centre. I know Yasser comes over and things, and he's seen it and he's witnessed it all, and I think they're smart enough to understand that, the emotional attachment that the club has to the stadium and all that sort of stuff. But from their perspective, they probably just look at it and say that, they're building a city, for fuck's sake. They're building an entire city, new city. So I don't think technology is a barrier to them doing amazing things with building architecture and building stadiums and things. So they would probably just say, look, you've got all this green space, countryside just outside Newcastle. You've got an airport that's got miles and miles of countryside around it. Like, they could just buy that, no problem. Plonk a big stadium there. They could make it the best stadium in the whole entire world. It wouldn't be in the city centre anymore, but they would have to pay for transport links to it and everything as well to be able to safely ship all those people, 65, 70,000 people in and out every fortnight, every other week. But from their perspective, they probably think, well, that's going to be the least hassle. That's going to get us the best stadium. They might come to the conclusion that no one's actually going to care in the long term if they start getting a successful team, even if we still pine after St James's Park in the city centre, and even if it negatively impacts the city centre. Why do PIF care about that? I don't think we can discount that as a thought that'll come into their mind as well. What would you say about that?
I kind of get where you're coming from with that one, because they don't have any emotional attachment to the stadium, or not like we do anyway. That's an absolute certain. But I wonder how this would impact the Rubens, because as we know, they've got quite a large retail presence in Newcastle city centre as well. How much of those matchday fans spend in their retail outlets is anyone's guess. But as you mentioned before, would have a huge financial impact on, say, a weekend in midweek trade when there is a match on for a huge amount of those businesses within the city centre. I mean, the sale of Greg's sausage rolls will plummet. Nobody really wants that, does it? Yeah, moving it out towards, say, Ponteland or anything like at the airport, like you just mentioned, to me, I think that's a big no-go, because they're going to have to then maybe put a new rail link in there from the metro or anything like that. Can't really see that happening. It's got its own unique transport setup right now. You can get pretty much any bus direct into the city centre from pretty much anywhere in the northeast now, and you're within walking distance of the stadium. You don't have to get a bus followed by a metro, followed by another bus or anything like that. You're pretty much straight there. Even Central Station is 5 minutes walk away from it. So anyone coming up from London, literally get off the train, walk to St James's, and you're done. But nah, I don't think saying moving away from the city is a feasible option. I think that would cause more outrage than when Ashley decided to rename it to you know what. I'm not even going to mention the name. I think it'd be that type of level of outrage. But yeah, what will happen? We don't know. The other thing that I was talking about before as well is there's the talk of the new training ground. So how much is that going to cost too? Well, they want to do the training ground and the stadium. I mean, what's more important? Obviously, the stadium brings in more revenue, but the training ground gets the squad that little bit better. And then you can bring in revenue from the training ground because you can sponsor that as well. And that's not going to come cheap. And have they already spent some like 20 million redoing Dullest Park, whatever it was?
10 million, yeah.
10 million, yeah. So they've invested a lot in that. I don't know. If you were given two envelopes to open now, and one of them was to say we're going to rebuild a brand new stadium, world-class facilities, just up the road from St James's Park, and it's going to be a 65,000 seater, or we're going to redevelop St James's Park, keep it as it is, and have that as a 65,000 seater. Which one are you going to go for? Which would you take?
I would rather stay at St James's Park if they can get it to 65 and if they can turn it into a world-class venue. But I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, or at least they're not going to be able to do that without a massive amount of upheaval. Because, like, if a renovation of that scale, where the team going to play, when Spurs did theirs, they basically turned White Hart Lane on a 90-degree angle and like built it as they were taking it, their White Hart Lane down. But they played at Wembley for 2 seasons, or at least 1 season. So we don't have that option. So there's so much to factor in and to take into account. And I'm just interested in how much of this does come out in the feasibility study, and how much is still going to be, and whether they're going to sort of sway one way and say this is the decision we're going to go towards. But knowing how Saudi, how they operate, they're not gonna. This is a once in a lifetime opportunity, really. So, and I just think that they might come to the conclusion that people will be unhappy, and I don't think they'll underestimate the disappointment if they were to move out of the city centre. But I think they might conclude that it's worth it, and that people will soon forget about that when we've got a team winning titles and things like that. And let's be honest, they'd probably be right. In the long run, like the kind of fans that they want to attract over from overseas who haven't got that connection to the city, younger fans who would then be able to get in and get a ticket. Who knows? But I do think nobody wants to hear that, and nobody wants to consider that. And I don't. I want to stay in the city because I think that, like I said before, that's a non-negotiable for me, because it's the USP. And for fans of our generation who've been grown up going to St James's Park, that'll really take something away from it. But football fans are fickle. If we win a title, who cares? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, obviously we want to win it at St James's Park.
I do.
But if you said to me, this is more or less a guarantee of having a successful football club, and you can have the best stadium in the world, that's a pretty hard thing to say. Actually, we want to stay at St James's just for all the history and all of the tradition. Do you know what I mean? Though these are the things that are going to be playing around, and that I wonder if they come out.
You're pulling on your heartstrings, mate. You really are. Yeah. I had it was a while ago, and I think one of the very first pods we know about this, I had quite a passionate rant about why we should stay at St James's. And I still think we should do. I love that place. I used to see it every single day when I walked to school. I actually, when we were down in Melbourne for the games and the fan chat, I was talking to a lad from New Zealand who recognised from the pod, and he was actually talking about the Stadium Expansion podcast. That's the one that he first discovered us. And you were like, look, moving forward, we have to leave St. James's Park. And this is a lad who's based, he used to live in Newcastle. He now lives in New Zealand. I can't remember his name, but if you're watching, let me know in the comments if it was you, mate. But yeah, he is more than happy for us to move away if it means we can get to that next step, that next level of being an elite football club. I mean, Madrid, they're leaving are they leaving the Bernabeu and going somewhere else, or is the Bernabeu getting totally rebuilt?
They rebuilt it, yeah. So, but it's completely different.
Yeah.
It's a complete renovation.
Yeah. So if that's something we can do to rebuild St. James's to look like the Bernabeu, because I think the Bernabeu looks insanely good for what they're going to do to it. But yeah, I want to stay. I totally get people's idea why they think we should move. I get your opinions on why we should move. But the one thing we all agree on, it needs to stay in the city centre.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think we should move. I'm just thinking of it from a PIF perspective, because they're the ones who are going to be throwing multiple billions into this, and they're the ones who've bought the club with a vision of winning titles and turn it into the best club in the world. They're the ones who've got the means to build the best facilities in the world. I think that we talked about the training ground, that's a bit different because no one's got an emotional attachment to that. So, like, I think just get the best space that the players are going to be happiest, and you could build that near Ponteal because that's where all the players live. So you could do that, but it's a bit of a different situation to Man City, where they had that precinct already in East Manchester, and then Abu Dhabi have just plowed money into that. They've expanded the Etihad because they had all that space. It was built for the Commonwealth Games, so they've had all that space and they've turned that into sort of a football area, the whole area. So St. James is not like that because, like we said, it's got the unique selling point of being slap bang in the middle of the city, which, yeah, everyone I think would want us to stay there. But I'm sure, I actually think if you ask Keegan or Bobby or Dimmy, our podcast co-hosts, I think if you ask them, they might have a slightly different opinion because they're not they've not been brought up in that tradition that we have of living there and going to the stadium every week and everything. So it's probably it doesn't have it's got good memories for them from when they've been, absolutely, but not the same sort of long-term ingrained cultural memories we've got of going to every game and meeting your mates in the Bodega and things before the game. So yeah, it's a very interesting. It's going to be really interesting what happens with this, and we'll be doing a podcast as soon as the feasibility study gets released. We'll see what they say. And I've just been a little bit of devil's advocate there, just with what Piff might be thinking, not necessarily what I think, because I think we should be staying in the city centre if at all possible. But I also want to have a team that wins titles, and I don't know. I'd probably sell both my children for that to happen. So Newcastle moving to a Newcastle. No, I'm joking. Alan and Rosie, I won't. But Newcastle moving to a new stadium though is. I think I could handle that if it meant we were going to start winning things. Because we'll see what happens. Is there anything else you want to say on that stadium point or touch on before we finish?
No, I think that's it. We've rabbited on enough about it. It's a subject which will continue to be talked about for the foreseeable until everything gets published.
Perfect. So one last thing I do want to do as well is just to pass our wishes on to Darren Eales as well. That was pretty shocking news last week. Yeah. So it was quite upsetting really for him, and hopefully he's going to get the treatment he needs. It sounds like they've got his cancer at a stage where they can treat it, and he's still going to be able to work for a while. So he's done really good work since he's come in. He seemed like a very personable and approachable person who's been really good with the fans. And he's put a lot of heart and soul into his job. So from everyone at the Toon and the podcast, we say to Darren, get well soon. Hope the treatment goes well, and thank you for what you've done for the club in the last 2 years.
Absolutely.
All right, so we'll be back for a review of the Everton game, which will be probably on Sunday night. And we'll see you then. Thanks, Craigie.
Cheers, mate. Have a good one.
All right.